Welcome to the Mastery Call for Resume Writing Academy. Today we're going to be talking about resume and profile design. I am Marie Zimenoff, CEO of Resume Writing Academy and Career Thought Leaders. We're happy that you've joined us here today. We are going to be talking about the research that informs our design best practices. So when we design a resume, it isn't just the things that we think are great, it's the designs that we know make it easy for our readers. We are going to be talking about that today, and then we're going to go through some best practices. As we go and as we get towards the middle of the call, we'll be looking for your tips and questions. As we are recording this to have a clean recording for everyone, I'll be reading the questions that came in during the live call. And we had some questions that folks asked before the call, so we'll go through those as well. We'll do some live demo as appropriate and helpful to illustrate some of the questions that you all had. When you do join us for a future live open call, this is what it will look like. You can ask questions, share, and you'll see all of the interaction we had on this call, and we look forward to your interaction on our next live open call. A few updates. We have the Certified Social Brand Analyst program coming up in May. That's the class that was developed by Reach, and Career Thought Leaders has recently taken over leading the Reach Personal Branding Training. Social Branding Analyst program talks about content on LinkedIn and a lot about how you coach a client to use LinkedIn to grow their brand. We also have an Academy Certified Resume Writing program and training class coming up starting May 18th. Watch for more information about the Grow Your Business Week, June 19th through 22nd. And then we have a LinkedIn Profile ESummit coming up at the end of that week on June 23rd. So you'll have a week full of professional development there in June. Block out your calendar, whatever you need to do to make sure you can join us for that. Some people have asked what's an open call, and these open calls really are just that, open calls. They're meant for us to discuss, to talk, to ask questions, to share best practices. They're not necessarily a webinar where we're delivering a good deal of information, although we will be delivering some information. And you won't get copies of slides or handouts, but you will get the recording so that you can watch it later. An ESummit is what Resume Writing Academy uses to deliver training. These are 2-hour trainings, and you can view them live or recorded. Anyone who purchases an ESummit gets the live access as well as the recording and the handouts. These are on specific topics or specific challenges that people have when they're writing resumes. As I said, we have one on LinkedIn profile writing coming up in June. They provide you with more than 50 pages of handouts, resources, sample resumes, or LinkedIn profiles, so it's a very rich training experience. The level of training and handouts and samples that we offer is unique, something that the Resume Writing Academy does that is not common in the industry. So that's our ESummits, and when you see advertisements for ESummits now, you'll know what those are. Our Academy Certified Resume Writer class is 5 90-minute classes. You can see the topics that we cover here, really going from A to Z, very in-depth in terms of resume writing strategy, as well as formatting. How do you format a document in Word? We give you real-time feedback in your strategies and writing, as well as your formatting. We have homework assignments that we've created that strategically challenge you to address the specific issues we see quite frequently in resume writing. And we also do the formatting in video, in classroom setting, and I do a lot of one-on-one coaching in formatting for people to make sure that they understand how to do all of the things we're going to talk about today. The Academy Certified Profile Writer is similar in terms that we go through strategy. How do you write a profile? How do you create a strategic profile? How do you optimize it for reading on the web? We cover LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and are agile so that we can adjust to teach whatever the new social media is that's coming on board. When you get your Academy Certified Profile Writer, you get lifetime updates so that you can always be on top of what's going on in the social media profile writing world. So let's talk a little bit about why we design resumes the way we do. On the left, you'll see a document that's very heavy text. And you might have seen this before. Hopefully you share it with your clients. The Ladders did this research a while ago, and it really shows that if there's a heavy, dense text, the eye really doesn't read that much. The red spots are where the eye is reading, and then the blue is where they kind of glanced here and there, and you'll see that on the left they didn't even make it to the bottom. On the right, we have a modern resume. So it has shading, it has lines, it has spacing, and short bytes, which we'll be talking about as one of our best practices. These short bytes lead the eye through the resume, and you can see that recruiters do go all the way to the bottom and look for that education. They know it's there, they know where to look for it. They're going down there to read it. And the same thing happens, by the way, if you have a 2-page resume. They will flip to that second page and look at that education, just as they're doing here on this 1-page resume. So very interesting research that was done. I would encourage you to look at the research, and you can Google eye tracking research resumes. You'll find it pretty easily. Through Ladders and Career Builder, there's been several people that have published this research. And it shows how to write a resume that will get a recruiter to look through it. Sometimes I have clients say, oh, I want this more bio format for my resume, kind of the old school look that you see on the left. And I'll share this with them and help them understand how much it's really going to hurt the readability of their resume if they use that format. Same thing in terms of LinkedIn. They did some research on what people looked at in LinkedIn. And this is the old user interface, but we can take something away from it. Recruiters spent their time looking at your LinkedIn profile picture and then your headline and your details there on top. They're drawn quickly to the media or visuals on the profile, as well as the big bold text, your headline, job titles. This really helps us see why LinkedIn changed their user interface, because that's what recruiters were looking for anyway, and recruiters are the main paying audience for LinkedIn. So LinkedIn made those easier to find. They're hiding all the rest of your text, which recruiters really weren't reading anyway. They're getting right to the details. Your headline, your titles, your dates, your companies, and hiding that text because honestly it wasn't that important to recruiters anyway. You do still see the full first experience section, and that makes sense when you think about what a recruiter is looking for, because they put the most emphasis on that current or latest experience entry. So in LinkedIn, it's the only text that you see without clicking see more. Based on this research, what are the best practices that we can take away? We want to use divider lines or similar formatting in our resumes and LinkedIn profiles, and we'll look at some of how you can do that if you have questions about how you might create a line in a resume, and we'll look at how you can do it in a LinkedIn profile. We're going to write tighter with fewer words so that we can create these short bytes. Place education at the bottom of a resume. We don't need to move it up, and it doesn't really need to be in the summary. You could highlight it there if you want to, but recruiters know where to look for it and they go to the end to find it. And of course, on a resume and a LinkedIn profile, we're going to create a headline with words that matter. No summary or summary of qualifications, wasting that line on our resumes. Short bytes. So our first best practice is short bytes. This is something that I still see coming across in resumes on my desk, both from professional resume writers as well as from clients, where we're using long paragraphs, especially in the introduction of a resume, the summary area, and those long paragraphs are really moving out of style quite quickly. We're going to use paragraphs that are 3 lines or shorter, bullets that are 2 lines or shorter, and mix those up so that it's nice and short and crisp and easy to read throughout the resume. Lists of bullets. It's another thing I still see in client resumes especially, and it really isn't any different than a long, dense paragraph. We want to break those up into categories or use sections of bullets to help move the eye through the page. This is an example of one of the more leading edge techniques, although we've been doing it for a while. Our clients are still somewhat uncomfortable with the idea of boiling their job description down into the details, into the essence, getting rid of all the fluff in the language. I don't do this for every client for sure, and I do try to make sure that job descriptions are nice, clean, and crisp, always focused on the value, not on duties, and that those long introductory paragraphs for experience sections are taken down to 3-line paragraphs, just like any other paragraph in a resume. Challenging ourselves to boil it down, write tight, tell them what they need to know. Clean, stable formatting. This has a lot to do in your resumes about how you're designing it in Word. No first page headers. First page headers aren't going to be picked up by applicant tracking systems, and it doesn't look like it's something you meant to put on the page. When you view it on a screen in Word, it's all grayed out. It's not attractive, and it's not necessary to put information in the header on a first page. Write tabs that align with the right margin. So if you're wanting to move data over to align with the right margin, you're going to use a Write tab to do that. If you don't know how to use Write tabs, take a class, do the tutorial through Word. We'll teach you in the ACRW class. Or just don't do it that way if you don't know. It's perfectly fine to keep those dates tucked in next to the company or job title. But when you hit tab or space multiple times to get that information over to the right margin, it's not going to be lined up exactly. It's going to move around on you and possibly even move down to the next line when someone else opens it on their computer. It's just not clean, stable formatting that we want to be using in professional documents. We're still using Word.doc files and, of course, using full links for our clients' LinkedIn profiles, as you see on this screen here. And if you know your client is applying through applicant tracking systems, ATS, applicant tracking systems, you're going to remove that hyperlink. And even if you are keeping the hyperlink, you want the full web address so that if the link breaks or something happens, the hiring manager or recruiter can still get to whatever link you're posting them to. And then if you're giving clients a LinkedIn profile that they're supposed to copy and paste into LinkedIn, make sure that it's set up for them to do that. LinkedIn sections are shorter, not as wide as a Word document page. Let's say if you have a 3-line paragraph on your Word document and they paste it into LinkedIn, it's going to be 4 lines and perhaps even longer. So you want to know how you're creating that LinkedIn profile in Word and how it's going to copy and paste and look in LinkedIn. You can nudge in the right margin to help create that look. The lines in LinkedIn are about 100 characters, and you can experiment with that, figure out what works. We'll teach you how to do it in our profile writing class. You want it to look exactly like it's going to look in LinkedIn so that you know when your client copies and pastes it that it will carry through the formatting you want it to have. So someone's asking about first page headers, and we'll go into a document and look at that in just a little bit. First, we're going to continue on here and talk about designing for readability. Designing for readability means that we're using borders to distinguish sections, like you saw in the resume that they used when they did the research. That one on the right had the borders that they used to distinguish the sections. And you can also create borders in a LinkedIn profile. We have an example that I'll show you of that in a few minutes. We're using boxes and shading. However, you don't want to use text boxes. You can use the border function to create boxes and then use shading inside of them. You can insert shapes as long as the words aren't in the shape. The shape will disappear in applicant tracking systems, but the words will still be there if you use a shape behind the words and not a text box that includes the words. Shading really does help draw the eye, so think about that when you're using shading. Is that where you want the eye to go in the document? Then using white space between the lines, white space between bullets, and chunking, which means that when you're using white space, you put more space between each experience entry, for instance, than between the bullets within that experience entry. You might have a full line of space between each experience, and maybe 4-point spacing between the bullets. If your bullets are just as spaced as it is between the experience sections, it gets really confusing in terms of what the eye is supposed to read. We'll look at an example for that as well here in a minute. So someone had asked in the chat, why not text boxes? Text boxes and anything that is in a text box will disappear when it goes through most applicant tracking systems. It won't be scored, it won't be read. Since there are other ways to do it, using borders or shading, shapes, or even tables, we'll choose those options. Tables are more likely to be read by an applicant tracking system than text boxes. Text boxes disappear in most systems. Tables will work in most systems, despite what you've heard out there. If there's a way that we can use that is less likely for text to disappear, we will. Of course, we can still create a great looking document and have it be mostly applicant tracking system friendly. Margins are the same on all 4 sides and top and bottom. I usually use somewhere between 0.6 and 0.8 inches. 1-inch margins are really big, and there's usually a better way to use the white space on the page. If you go below 0.6 or 0.5, it's likely that the person who does print the document will have some of the text cut off, and we want them to be able to use it in whatever way they want to. Minimizing non-distinguishing information, for instance, core competencies, those are great, but they shouldn't take up the whole page. Non-distinguishing information, again, might be those core competencies. They're important, but not distinguishing. They're not going to be different than what everybody else puts on the page. If we use 6 or 7 lines putting all those core competencies in there, we're missing out on the opportunities to spend space on the page looking at what is different about our client or what their distinguishing information is. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying minimize non-distinguishing information. So someone's asking about, is corporate getting away from applicant tracking systems or ATS? I would actually say the opposite. More and more companies are using applicant tracking systems, even the ones that can be really employee or applicant friendly, typically are using an applicant tracking system. It doesn't mean that they may not see the documents and do their research on candidates in both ways, where they look through the resumes and they use the search function. Many companies are still using applicant tracking systems. Research shows that there's 190 plus applicant tracking systems, so be careful when someone says that something does or does not work in applicant tracking system. They're simplifying it a little bit too much. There's a lot going on there. And research shows that more than 60% of companies use an applicant tracking system. The hard part, of course, is we don't know if the client is applying to one of those 60% or not. If they're applying online at all, we can assume that there's probably an applicant tracking system involved. If they're applying to a small company, well, that small company, if that's using an online application, may be still using an applicant tracking system or resume scoring system that they've outsourced the hiring and resume parsing to another company. Someone else asked about the margins being the same on all 4 sides. That's just consistency and professionalism in your document. If you have a large margin on top and small on the sides, it looks funny. Maybe they don't have to be exactly the same between top and sides, but if they're too different, it makes the page look unbalanced. And of course, you always want the same on top and bottom and the same on right and left. On resumes, you can use color. Most of you are using color. Using one color on a resume was, in the research, most effective. Most people are drawn to the resume if there's one main color. Then, of course, in LinkedIn, you have the opportunity to create a background section that brands your client using their brand colors or something that shares their brand, perhaps pictures of them speaking or coaching, whatever makes sense for your client. In terms of fonts, It really doesn't matter if you use serif or sans serif fonts. You'll read one group of people saying one thing, one group of people saying the other. It's what fits for your client's brand. If everybody's resume is in Calibri or Arial, they're all going to look the same. It's not going to be any better than using Times New Roman. Use what fits for your client's brand. You want to use a font that's easy to read. Garamond and Book Antiqua, some of the serif fonts, can be more difficult to read in a small type, so you want to be careful of the size as well. It's funny, we're trying to get away from using serif fonts, and everybody's big on sans serif, and pretty soon that will be as overused as Times New Roman was, and it'll flip back. So distinguish your client by picking a font that works for them, that's readable, and of course is a common font from Microsoft Word, not anything that you would have to download. If you use Calibri for the body text, for instance, you might use Garamond or Book Antiqua for the headings. That's what we're suggesting here, where it says sans serif for heading, serif for body, or vice versa. Just helps to create a distinctive look. Of course, you don't have to do that. If you are going to use more than one font, you want to use them strategically, so not interchangeably throughout the document. You want all the body to be in one type and size, and all the headings to be in one type and size, although sometimes I like the name to be a little bigger than the other headings in the document. This really is a personal preference in terms of font. Some might look more distinguished than others, so the serif fonts can look a little bit more professional, perhaps Century or Constantia. Calibri, Verdana, Tahoma, those sans serif fonts can be a little bit boxier, and as your font gets a little bit bigger, they can look masculine and perhaps entry level. Size does have a lot to do with how your font looks. If you use a font that is too big, you look entry level. If you use a font that's smaller, you can still have good readability by creating space above and below bullets, and not have that look of an entry-level employee by using a larger font. If you use color for an electronic resume, as people have asked, you can use color, of course. You just want to use something that will print and still work. So when you print it, you should still be able to read the words. So print it at your home and see how it looks. Print it in black and white. See how it looks in case someone doesn't want to print in color. You want to make sure that it's going to look good, so should someone print it. And of course, you want it to look good on the screen, and color can do both. Someone asked about Arial font specifically. Of course, Arial can be okay. It's more the design of the resume and how you're putting it together. The Arial font may be overused and could look outdated, but if you're using other modern resume techniques, it might be fine. For instance, you could use something different for the headings so that it looks modern and has some design to it. Someone asked about graphic images, which moved us very nicely to our next slide. Graphics need to be strategic. I don't like seeing resumes that have clip art on them or pictures that aren't in some way adding value to the document. We want to use graphics that tell a story. Sales or other types of data and graphs, pictures or symbols that are relevant and add meaning. I've seen people use symbols for professional associations, pretty effective. I've seen people use symbols for companies that can be okay. We have to think about, is that where you want to draw the attention? Do we want the resume to be about the companies where the individual has worked? Maybe, maybe not. Think about that as you're thinking about your pictures. Symbols for awards that they've won, very effective. A symbol or picture is going to draw the eye. We want to make sure that the way we're doing that, it's something that we want to highlight about the candidate. Choose those graphics wisely, not just to decorate a resume. They should be strategic and really draw the eye to something that adds value. You can create a meme, if you will, a quote that you put into the document in a graphic way. You do want to note that all graphics will disappear and not be scored when it goes through an applicant tracking system. That really doesn't matter. Most hiring managers are going to go back and look at the actual resumes and share the actual resume with the hiring manager, not the stripped down stuff that comes out of the ATS. A graphic or a picture will not prevent an applicant tracking system from scoring a resume. It will not be scored itself. That testimonial that you have in a graphic may disappear, sales graph may disappear, so you want to make sure you have the data in there in text as well as the graph if you're talking about sales numbers. It gives you the opportunity to do something visual to draw the eye. You want to know that and choose wisely. In LinkedIn, of course, the graphics that you have the opportunity to put in are changing. Here at the bottom of this slide, this is the main graphic that shows up in a LinkedIn profile, which is what the person has posted in terms of articles, and then what the person has commented or liked in terms of other people's posts. This is the most prominent graphic besides your client's headshot that is in LinkedIn. Then if you scroll down in the new LinkedIn interface, you'll see the media that's attached to the person's current position on LinkedIn. The graphics and media that you might have attached to a summary, the viewer has to click See More to see that summary and see any graphics. The most prominent graphics will be what they've been doing in LinkedIn that you see here at the bottom of the slide, and then any media that they have attached to their most current position on LinkedIn. Those are the visuals you have the opportunity to use there. You can connect the same graphics to a LinkedIn profile that you used in a resume if the person's comfortable with that and it's appropriate. If you've created a graph around their sales, or if you have the symbols of their certifications or awards, you can attach those as graphics in LinkedIn just as you've put them in the resume. Gives you an opportunity to get visual, which we know is important in both the resume and LinkedIn profile. So I'm going to show you some ways that you can use LinkedIn symbols, and I have a profile here. So you can see on this profile, it's this one, this sample was written by Melanie Lenchy, and this is how a person would copy and paste it and put it into LinkedIn. So you'll see that the right margin is a little bit bigger here than the left, and that's because this is set up so that someone could copy and paste it into LinkedIn. But Melanie has used bullets and spacing here in the profile, just like you would in a resume. She's inserted symbols, and the latest article I wrote on LinkedIn has some links to places where you can find symbols that will work in LinkedIn. She has bullets, nice, clean, short sentences, and space between the bullets here. We'll look at one more sample for LinkedIn. You can see that we've used some all caps and we have bullets. We want to use all caps sparingly, but it is one of the few opportunities we have in LinkedIn to make something stand out. You can see that we've used different types of bullets here with the stars and a line, which we've created by copying and pasting a symbol over and over into the profile to create that line. It gives you the ability to do separation just like you would in a resume and draw the eye down through the profile. Let's look at a few resumes, and I'll switch over here. So this resume was submitted by Marjorie Sussman, and someone had asked about, what do you do if the current position isn't really relevant to the job aim as much as older positions are? And here is one way to do it. So this person has stacked the experience in the center. It's somewhat that functional or skills-based resume, but instead of hiding the experience at the bottom, which can drive a hiring manager crazy, we've put it in the middle of the document so it at least says, I'm not trying to hide anything. Here are my places, titles, and dates. Although you can see they've been strategic at putting the title in a less obvious place, not leading with that. Then the experience down here is in the order of relevance instead of in the order of chronological history. So this is a great format to use when our client's not applying through an applicant tracking system, because of course we know in an applicant tracking system this will not work. When the explanations for each job are not connected to the jobs at all, you'll have no score. You might get some years of experience, but you won't have any keyword score because these are not connected. The experience is not connected to the dates. So your other option, we'll look at a resume created by Birgitta, one of our other ACRWs, and she is in Sweden, so you'll see that this document looks a little bit different. Here we have a lot of power in the space on the page. This sales position that this person was in most recently wasn't as relevant. It was something they were doing, but not really something they wanted to continue to do, so it is shorter. Our eye might look at that and then move on to the long section here, where the more relevant experience takes up more space on the page. The eye is going to automatically be drawn to that where there's more space taken up on the page. So consider how you can translate as much of the current position as possible to be relevant to the future position. There's some language strategy there that we can use. And in terms of formatting, use the space on the page to emphasize what's most relevant by taking that space to explain and really highlight the accomplishments that speak to the future job goal. While we're here, just to illustrate the concept of chunking, you'll see that there's more space between the jobs, so between these jobs, than there is within the job itself, and some lines that make it clear that we're moving from one job to the next. Actually, someone had asked a question about this resume being accomplishment story heavy. And she does have great accomplishment stories here. They're separated into sections, so it's easy for the eye to look at. And, there's little job description content here. She talked about accomplishments or achievements, but not really the duties of the job. This is a more modern way of doing things. It's kind of where resumes are headed. It doesn't work for all clients, for sure, to do less job description language. However, most of the time those keywords are included in our accomplishment stories anyway. So thinking about, do you really need that job description? How much of it do you need? How can you help the reader by making things easier to find and focusing in on the accomplishments instead of duties? So someone else asked about that they had a resume that they did for a client. It was a modern format. The client loved it. The HR people where he was working loved it as well, but the C-level folks in the companies did not like the format and wanted the old traditional resume with a long list of bullets, and wondered what I would recommend in that case, because the more modern format was going to be beneficial, but he was concerned about how the C-suite would see it. And of course, depending on the culture of our target companies, we want to adjust what we do. If they want to see more bullets, we could do that, but use categories, maybe a category that's overview, then a category that's leadership, kind of like you see here, so that you get some of the look that they're looking for while we still have an effective document. Also, you might ask where they're getting that. Why do they think the C-suite doesn't like the modern look? Because sometimes they're making that as an assumption. It isn't really something that they've heard. You can share with them the research around eye tracking and debrief why they want to make that decision and if it might really be the best thing for them. Someone also asked here about the job titles and the dates and what will happen in an applicant tracking system. Most likely, this information here will be dumped under the last job title. But since they're all under one company, it's hard to figure out what might happen here. But that has more likelihood of being scored than it did in the previous resume, because it is connected to a title and a date. Even though the title and the date are older, the keywords will still be read because the title and the years are connected. It should calculate the years of experience that the person has in those job titles. And asked about applicant tracking systems, that people have been using them in the wrong way. They've been trying to trick the system with keywords, putting in as many keywords as possible and get through that first hoop. The federal government, I guess, Mike said, has been getting away from applicant tracking systems in 2010, 2012. And Mike was wondering if companies, the private sector, will be getting rid of this as well. What I've seen is that applicant tracking systems are not going away, they're getting smarter. So now systems can read and take the meaning or read your word in context, and that's why a large core competency list isn't doing an applicant in a new applicant tracking system much good, because now those systems are looking for the words in context. They're getting smarter. They're not going away, they're getting smarter. So if you're writing a good, solid, strategic resume that communicates the words in context and translates into the new employer's language with your keywords and your accomplishments, and the keywords are incorporated into the accomplishments, that's going to do even better in an applicant tracking system than having those keywords in a list, because they are in context. So it's going to score higher when those words are in context. So not that I'm saying that we don't want to do a list of core competencies. Some recruiters still like it. We just want to be careful about how much space we take up with that. We want to take a short amount of space there because it's not differentiating and it's not in context. Use the bulk of the page for those accomplishments. We'll move over to Word here and look at our headers. So someone asked about the header and how do you get one into your document, or how do you know if you have one? So let's put Daisy's name here in a header. So I'm going to get there just by double clicking up here at the top of the page, and you can see the header shows up. And if I type Daisy's name in it and then get out of the header, you can see that it makes it gray on the screen, and it will not go through or be scored in an applicant tracking system. So not a place we want to put contact information that we want an applicant tracking system to dump into its system. The other way you can get a header is up here under under Insert, Header. So you can also do it that way, and it'll take you right there into the header. You might want to use that on a second page. We just don't want to use it on a first page. The other thing someone asked is, how do you create the look where there's lines around a header? So this is the headline for our resume here, nursing professional, and we might make it bigger and bold. And then, how do you get those lines on either side? I'm going to do it using tabs, and I'm going to create tabs using the paragraph function here. It's a nice way to do it when you're setting multiple tabs. Let me pull that down into your view. So I want to set one in the middle, and this might not be the exact middle, but we'll move that around. So 3.4 center, and then the leading line, and set. Now I need to set one at the right side of the page. 6.91, right, and that leader line, and set. Now if I hit OK, and I was here on this line, I can hit tab, come to the end of the word and hit tab, and I have those lines. If I want them to be up in the middle of the word, I'm going to use the superscript button here, and now I have that look where the lines are on either side of the header. So someone had also asked about borders and bullets, so I'll answer the bullets question first. Someone asked, I thought all the bullets had to be the same, and I will do 2 different bullets sometimes, a bullet in the summary and then in the experience section. You can see that the bullets in the summary are all the same, and then if you get into the education and experience section, they're all the same. No more than 2 types of bullets if you do mix or use more than one. You wanted to use borders around a section heading, so let's do that here around experience. You can use the borders function to do that. I'm going to make this bigger and bold. Then we'll use the border function over here. And it's going to look a little bit different in Mac, but you can come in here and use the borders and shading. This, while you're in here, you can do everything. So I usually actually come into this screen where I can choose the thickness, I can choose the color, and then I can choose if it goes on top, bottom, or what have you. Make that a little thicker so that you can see it. So that borders and shading gives you the opportunity to choose all of those options. Then when you hit OK, voila, it's on where you want it to be. Now we're not drawing lines here, so when you go to draw and you can draw a line, that is going to be less stable. It's going to move on you. It might not go all the way out to the end of the page. So we use the border function for a nice clean look. Then we can use the little paint bucket to dump in color as appropriate. And again, we want to be careful of getting too dark, because if it's too dark, the words may not print on top of the color. So play around with that and see what you think. Someone asked a question about a resume having to be 1 page. And of course, as Jane said here when she's asking the question, every word has to count. It has to be short and succinct. But that doesn't mean that a document still has to be 1 page. When I hear people say that they've heard a resume has to be 1 page, I always ask, what level of position does that recruiter hire? Most of the time, the people who say a resume has to be 1 page are recruiters who hire entry-level people and are tired of seeing 2-page resumes for entry-level candidates. We still want to do the strategy that makes sense for our candidate. I always ask people, if they were going to buy a $100,000 car, would they buy it off a paragraph description? Some people might, but most are going to want to know all the details. They're going to want that sexy 5-page glossy brochure. And so if you're a $100,000 candidate or $200,000 candidate, we want to make a marketing piece that looks like that, which most likely is not going to be a 1-page resume unless you're in a highly modern industry where they want that very modern, sleek 1-page resume for an executive. And yeah, I agree with Jane that there's an urban legend out there that it needs to be 1 page. Not necessarily that people are even hearing it from a recruiter. So ask where they've heard that, why they think that is true, and if they've heard it from recruiters recruiting for their target positions, then we can help them create a 1-page resume that they use for those specific situations, and maybe they use their 2-page resume for other applications. That is the hard thing about resumes. We as resume writers have much more educated opinions than most of the public, but they're going to get opinions from everyone that they talk to. So it's helpful to talk through that with them and help them understand where your strategy is coming from, that it's not just an opinion. Educate them so that they can choose the best strategy for themselves. Someone asked about putting a border around a page. I do consider it to be a little bit old school, but Donald Burns, one of our ACRWs, does it, and he has the most modern resumes I've ever seen. So I think it depends on how it fits with your overall design. If you do use the border around the page, you want to make sure that you use other modern elements so that it doesn't look old school. If it's black and white and looks a little bit old school and then you put a border around it, it's probably going to look pretty old school. That's one of the lovely things about our industry. Things go in and out, and things that used to be old school come back around just in a more modern way. I think at some point even Times New Roman will make a reappearance because people have gotten away from using it for so long that now it's going to look different. Mike shared with the group of a study that cites serif fonts versus non-serif fonts or sans serif fonts, and some psychologists discovered that it sends a clear picture to the reader that they're getting ready to read a publication or a book, and that most people don't like to read publications, so they're going to struggle with the resume even though they don't know why. And that's part of why people are maybe moving to the serif fonts. Using Calibri, Arial may be better. Those sans serif fonts may be better. I still think it's a branding decision. Look at it, decide what you want. Readability has a lot more to do with size and spacing of fonts, and play around with that. If you use Garamond down to a size 10, it's going to be really hard to see. At 11, it's not bad. At 11.5, it might be even better. What makes sense for your client? Higher level clients, oftentimes I will be more likely to use some serif font, perhaps even in the body, because it looks less entry level. Those sans serif fonts, especially at a bigger size, can look boxy at entry level. So it's a subjective decision. It does have implications to our client's brand. We want to think about that. What look does this font have? And we don't want to overdo it because it's the words that really matter. Someone else asked about opportunity to go back and look at how we created the line around the nursing professional. So I'll do that again really quickly. And if you have any questions about our other programs, feel free to let me know. I will put back up here our last slide so that you have my contact information and some of our key links here. And then I'll go back and demonstrate that nursing look one more time before we close. So thank you for attending our open call, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. And you can always find out about those upcoming events at the Resume Writing Academy website. Let's come back here and we'll take away our tabs. Come up here to the paragraph button, tabs. I'll clear those just so we can start over. So we're going to set a center one, center with that leading line, and set. Then we're going to set the right one close to the right end of the page there, and that's going to be a right and the leading line, and set. And then we can see our tabs here. We hit tab once, we move to the end of the word, we hit tab again. You can see that this one's still superscript, so it looks good. This one we need to make superscript so that it looks the same. And there you go. Thank you again for joining us for the call, and we look forward to seeing you again. Feel free to connect with me, Marie Zimenoff, the CEO of Resume Writing Academy and Career Thought Leaders.